The brothers' silent scream. Prepare yourself. We are going back to the beginning, before the chains, before the venom, before the blood of Balder stained the white marble of the heavens. We are going back to the moment the shadow decided it was time for the sun to set. This is the epic tragedy of Loki, the father of monsters, the bringer of the end.
If Act 1 was the shadow, Act 2 is the blinding light that created it. For centuries, before the name Loki became a curse whispered in the dark, it was a name synonymous with the impossible. To understand the tragedy of his betrayal, we must first look at the era where Loki was the architect of Asgard's greatest triumphs. He was the master of the impossible, the one man in the 9 realms who could weave a solution out of thin air when the gods found themselves cornered by their own pride. But Loki's brilliance was always born of chaos. His most famous contribution to the divine treasury began not with a grand vision, but with a moment of impulsive, destructive mischief. Imagine the scene. Sif, the wife of Thor, asleep in her chambers, her hair a flowing river of natural gold that was the envy of every being in the cosmos. Loki, driven by a sudden, inexplicable urge to see the perfect broken, sheared that hair to the scalp. He left her bald, weeping, and humiliated. When Thor awoke and discovered the desecration, the very foundations of Asgard shook with his rage. He cornered Loki, his massive hands tightening around the trickster's throat, ready to crush every bone until they were as fine as flour. But Loki, even with the breath leaving his lungs, did not panic. He smiled. He offered a bargain. He wouldn't just replace the hair, he would bring back something that would make Sif more beautiful than ever, and the gods more powerful than they had ever dreamed. Loki descended into the deep subterranean forges of Svartalfheim. Here the air is thick with the scent of ozone and burning ore, and the rhythmic clanging of hammers is the only heartbeat. Loki did not just ask the dwarven masters, the sons of Ivaldi, for a wig, he manipulated them. He played on their vanity and their greed, sparking a legendary competition between the greatest craftsmen in existence. While the forges roared and the sparks flew like dying stars, Loki watched, shape-shifting into a stinging fly to distract the smiths, pushing them to their absolute limits. The result was a collection of treasures that define the Norse pantheon to this day. From those fires emerged Gungnir, the spear of Odin that never misses its mark. There was Skidbladnir, a ship that could sail over land and sea, yet fold up small enough to fit inside a pocket. And of course, there was the replacement for Sif's hair. Real gold, spun so fine that it took root in her scalp and grew like living silk. But the greatest prize was yet to come. Through Loki's machinations and the dwarves' sheer spite, Mjolnir was born, the hammer of Thor. A weapon of such terrifying power that it could level mountains, yet so perfectly balanced it would always return to its master's hand. Pause and consider the profound irony of this moment. The very hammer that Thor uses to protect Asgard, the very spear that Odin carries as a symbol of his absolute authority, these were not earned by the god's strength. They were the products of Loki's silver tongue and his ability to navigate the darkness. For a brief window in time, Loki was the darling of the Aesir. He was the one who filled their armory. He was the one who turned a shameful prank into a divine windfall. During this golden age, Loki and Thor were an inseparable pair. They were the ultimate odd couple of mythology. Thor was the hammer, Loki was the chisel. One broke the door down, the other picked the lock. They journeyed together to the ends of the world, to the halls of Utgard Loki and the mountains of the giants.
In these stories, Loki is often the hero. When the gods were tricked into a bad bargain with a giant mason who built the walls of Asgard, it was Loki who saved them from losing the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya. He did so by transforming himself into a mare, distracting the giant stallion, and ultimately giving birth to Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse that Odin would ride into battle. Think of the humiliation Loki endured for the sake of the gods. He shifted his very gender and species. He bore a child as a beast, all to protect the honor of a family that barely accepted him. He was the ultimate servant of the Aesir, yet even as he handed them the keys to their immortality, he could see the look in their eyes. It was a look of revulsion. To the Aesir, Loki's methods were unmanly. They loved the hammer, but they despised the trickery that forged it. They used his brilliance as a tool, a convenient weapon to be unsheathed in times of crisis and hidden away when the feasting began. Loki was the fixer. He was the man you called when you were in the mud, but he was not the man you wanted standing beside you in the light. This realization began to eat at him like a slow-acting poison. He was the most intelligent being in the room, yet he was treated like a performing animal. He saw the hypocrisy of Odin, a king who claimed to be the arbiter of justice, yet relied on a liar to keep his throne. He saw the simplicity of Thor, a warrior who took the credit for victories that Loki had engineered. The brilliance was still there, but the warmth was dying. The master of the impossible was beginning to realize that no matter how many treasures he brought to Asgard, no matter how many times he saved their lives, he would always be the giant-born. He would always be the shadow in the corner. It was during these centuries of service that the playfulness of his mischief began to sharpen into a blade. The jokes became crueler, the deceptions became more dangerous. The master of the impossible was tired of solving the gods' problems. He was starting to wonder what would happen if he became the one problem they couldn't solve. The stage was set. The treasures were in place. The weapons were forged. Now, all that was needed was a catalyst, a reason to turn all that brilliance against the golden halls he had helped build. As the centuries wore on in Asgard, Loki began to seek solace where the golden light of the Aesir could not reach. He returned to the wild, jagged reaches of Jotunheim, the land of his ancestors, a realm of iron woods and eternal frost. It was here, far from the mocking whispers of Odin's court, that Loki found Angerboda. She was a giantess of ancient power, a bringer of sorrows, but to Loki, she was the first being who saw him not as a tool, but as a man. Together, they fathered 3 children. And it is here, in the cradle of his secret family, that the God of Mischief was replaced by something far more dangerous, a father with everything to lose. In the quiet of the iron wood, Loki did not see monsters, he saw life, he saw his own blood. But in the high seat of Hidskjalf, Odin, the All-Father, was watching. Odin, consumed with his obsession with the end of days, looked through the mists of time and saw only ruin. He saw a wolf whose jaws would touch the heavens. He saw a serpent whose coils would crush the world. He saw a queen of the dead who would march on Asgard. Odin did not see the innocence of youth. He saw the blueprints of his own demise. He decided in his infinite wisdom that the only way to save the future was to destroy Loki's present. The raid on Loki's home was not a battle of warriors, it was a theft of souls. The Aesir descended upon the iron wood like a cold wind. Imagine the scene through Loki's eyes, his children, still young, still learning the world, being seized by the gods he once called brothers. There was no trial, there was no mercy, there was only the cold, hard logic of prophecy. First, they took the serpent, Jormungandr, he was but a hatchling then, a creature of shimmering scales and curious eyes. Odin, fearing the potential of the beast, did not even look the creature in the eye. He seized the young serpent and, with a casual cruelty that defines the Aesir's reign, cast him into the freezing, bottomless depths of the great ocean that surrounds Midgard. Loki watched as his child vanished beneath the black waves, condemned to a life of crushing pressure and eternal saltwater silence, growing larger and more bitter with every passing age, until he became the world-circling monster the gods had predicted he would be. Then they turned to Hel, Loki's daughter, a girl born with a face split between life and death, one side as beautiful as a summer morning, the other as pale and sunken as a week-old corpse. She was a child of two worlds, yet the gods judged her purely on her appearance. They saw her half-death as a sign of corruption. Odin banished her to Niflheim, the realm of fog and ice, the lowest of the 9 worlds. He made her the queen of the dead, not out of honor, but to hide her away where the perfect gods would never have to look upon her face again. Loki's daughter was buried alive in a kingdom of ghosts before she had ever truly lived. But the greatest cruelty was reserved for Fenrir, the wolf. Of all his children, Fenrir was the one Loki had hoped to keep close. The pup was brought to Asgard, perhaps as a twisted gesture of mercy, but he was treated like a ticking bomb. Only one god, Tyr, had the courage to feed him, to play with him, to treat him with a shred of dignity. But as Fenrir grew, so did the gods' fear. They played a game with the wolf, challenging his strength with chains they called lading and dromi. Fenrir, trusting and eager to please, snapped them all. Finally, the gods brought out Gleipnir, a chain forged from the sound of a cat's footsteps and the breath of a fish. It looked like a ribbon of silk, but it was a cage of absolute magic. Fenrir sensed the trap. He sensed the betrayal in the air. He made a deal. He would let them bind him, but only if one god placed a hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. The silence that followed was the sound of Asgard's honor dying. Only Tyr stepped forward. When the ribbon tightened and Fenrir realized he had been tricked, his jaws snapped shut, claiming Tyr's hand. The gods laughed. They cheered their victory as they drove a sword through the wolf's jaw and left him chained to a rock in the dark, destined to howl until the end of time. Where was Loki during all of this? He was forced to watch. He was forced to stand by as his children were cast into the sea, buried in the earth, and chained in the dark. He was told it was for the greater good. He was told it was the will of the All-Father. This is the moment the Trickster died. You cannot take a man's children and expect him to keep laughing at your jokes. You cannot treat a father like a monster and expect him to remain a brother. Loki looked at the golden halls of Asgard and no longer saw a home. He saw a prison. He saw a kingdom built on the suffering of his blood. The gods thought they were preventing Ragnarok. They thought that by binding the children, they had secured their future. But they've forgotten the most important rule of the 9 realms. The more you squeeze a shadow, the darker it becomes. By stealing Loki's family, Odin had given Loki something he never had before, a purpose. The brilliance that had once forged Mjolnir was now turned towards a singular goal. Not mischief, not pranks, not clever solutions, but a slow, methodical deconstruction of everything the Aesir held dear. If his children were to be monsters, then he would be the architect of the nightmare that would eventually consume the world. The father of monsters had been born, and Asgard was still laughing, unaware that the countdown to their funeral had just begun.
The gods had taken Loki's children. They had cast them into the sea, buried them in the fog, and chained them to the cold stone of the world. They expected Loki to mourn in silence. They expected him to accept the necessity of their cruelty. But they had forgotten who they were dealing with. Loki was not a god of hammers. He was a god of levers. He knew that to topple a mountain, you do not strike the peak. You find the single hidden fault line at its base. That fault line was Balder. Balder the Beautiful, the son of Odin and Frigg. He was the literal golden boy of the Aesir, a god so pure and so beloved that the very light of the sun seemed to emanate from his skin. He was the symbol of everything Loki was not. He was loved, he was trusted, and he was safe. To protect him, his mother Frigg had traveled to every corner of the 9 realms, extracting an oath from every living and non-living thing. The fire swore not to burn him, the iron swore not to pierce him, the stone, the water, the diseases of the earth, they all vowed that Balder would never be harmed. The gods celebrated this invincibility with a game. They would stand Balder in the center of the hall and hurl weapons at him, laughing as axes shattered against his chest and arrows turned to dust before touching his skin. It was a spectacle of divine arrogance. And in the corner of the hall, watching from the shadows, Loki saw the opening he had been waiting for. Loki did not strike with a sword, he struck with a question. Disguised as an old woman, he sat beside Frigg and gently, almost innocently, prodded at the edges of her protection. "Did everything truly swear the oath?" he whispered, and Frigg, in her motherly pride, let slip the secret. A small sprig of mistletoe grew to the west of Valhalla. It was too young, too insignificant to ask for an oath. In that moment, the fate of the universe was sealed. Loki did not see a plant, he saw a dagger. He traveled to the west of Valhalla and found the mistletoe. He didn't just pluck it, he fashioned it into a dart, carving it with the precision of a master craftsman, infusing it with all the cold, sharp resentment that had been festering in his heart since his children were stolen. He returned to the hall where the gods were playing their game. He found Hodr, the blind god, the brother of Balder, standing apart from the crowd, unable to participate in the fun. Loki leaned in close, his voice a warm, poisonous honey. "Why do you not join the sport, Hodr? Do you not wish to honor your brother?" "I have no weapon, and I cannot see where he stands." Loki placed the mistletoe dart in Hodr's hand. He guided the blind man's arm. He lined up the shot. "Take this," he whispered. "I will point the way. Throw it with all your might." The dart flew. It was a tiny, insignificant thing, a sprig of green in a hall of steel. But it passed through the air with a weight that shook the stars. It pierced Balder's heart. The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the history of the 9 realms. The laughter died in 1,000 throats. The light on Balder's skin flickered and went out. The god of purity slumped to the floor, dead by the hand of his own brother, fueled by the malice of a blood brother. But Loki's work was not yet finished. The gods, desperate to undo the tragedy, sent the messenger Hermod to the underworld to plead with Hel, Loki's banished daughter, for Balder's return. Hel, sitting on her throne of bones, offered a single condition. If everything in the world, living or dead, weeps for Balder, then he may return to the light.
If even one thing refuses, he stays with me." The world began to cry. The giants wept, the stones wept, the trees dripped with sorrow. It seemed as though the world would force the hand of fate, until, in a dark cave, the gods found a giantess named Thok. When they asked her to weep for the golden god, she looked them in the eye with a cold, dry gaze. "Thok will weep with dry tears for Baldur's funeral. Let hell keep what she holds." Thok was Loki. He had ensured that his daughter would keep her prize. He had ensured that Asgard's light was gone forever. When the gods finally realized the depth of his treachery, the hunt began. Loki fled. He turned himself into a salmon, hiding in the rushing waters of a waterfall. But the gods, using a net that Loki himself had invented in a previous life, caught him. They dragged him to a cavern beneath the earth. This was not a place for a trial. This was a place for a nightmare. They brought Loki's 2 remaining sons, Vali and Narfi. They turned Vali into a wolf, and in a fit of divine madness, he tore his brother Narfi to pieces. The gods then took Narfi's intestines and transformed them into iron chains. They bound Loki to 3 jagged rocks, one under his shoulders, one under his loins, and one under his knees. And then Skadi, the goddess of winter, placed a venomous serpent above his head. The poison began to drip, 1 drop at a time, burning into his skin, searing his eyes. His faithful wife, Sigyn, remained. She held a bowl to catch the venom, but every time the bowl is full, she must leave to empty it, and in those seconds, the poison falls. Loki thrashes in such agony that the entire world trembles. The prankster is gone. The architect is gone. There is only a man made of pain and poison waiting in the dark. The gods think they have won. They think the chains will hold. But Loki knows the truth. Every drop of venom that hits his face is a second closer to the end. Every earthquake is a test of the metal.
For an age beyond counting, there has been a rhythm to the universe. It is the rhythm of a drop of poison falling into a basin, and the rhythm of a man's silent, shaking breath. Beneath the roots of the world, Loki has remained. His skin is a map of scars. His eyes are clouded by the fumes of the serpent. His mind is a labyrinth of 1 billion calculated sleights. The gods in Asgard have moved on. They have feasted, they have laughed, and they have convinced themselves that the Loki problem was solved with iron and entrails. But prophecy is a debt that always collects, and in the heart of the deepest winter the world has ever known, the Fimbulwinter, the debt finally comes due. It begins not with a bang, but with a snap. The sound of Narfi's entrails finally turning to dust. The iron chains that have held Loki for millennia shatter like glass. Imagine the moment. The God of Mischief stands, his joints creaking like ancient oaks, his first breath of free air smelling of salt and sulfur. He does not scream, he does not celebrate. He simply looks toward the golden light of Asgard and smiles. Across the 9 realms the signals are sent.
In the freezing depths of the ocean, the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, uncoils. He has grown so vast that he has bitten his own tail for centuries. Now he lets go. The resulting tidal waves swallow entire civilizations in a single breath. To the north, the chains of the great wolf Fenrir snap. His lower jaw grazes the earth, while his upper jaw scrapes the heavens. His hunger is a black hole that will consume the sun itself. And at the head of this army of nightmares is Loki. He does not march as a prisoner. He sails upon Naglfar, a ship fashioned entirely from the fingernails of the dead. It is a vessel of rot and resentment, manned by the giants of Jotunheim and the pale legions of Hel. Loki stands at the prow, the wind of the apocalypse whipping through his hair. He is no longer the jester. He is the admiral of the end. He is leading his children, the wolf, the serpent, and the queen of the dead to the final family reunion. The Bifrost Bridge, that shimmering rainbow of divine order, groans under the weight of the coming fire. The watchman Heimdall blows the Gjallarhorn, a sound so loud it wakes the dead in every corner of the cosmos. The Aesir arm themselves. Thor grips Mjolnir. Odin mounts Sleipnir. They ride to the field of Vigrid to meet the monster they created. The battle is a symphony of iron and blood. Thor and the serpent lock in a struggle that will end both their lives. Fenrir finally finds the Allfather and fulfills the prophecy, swallowing the god of wisdom whole. The world is a cacophony of screaming gods and falling stars, and in the center of the madness, Loki finds Heimdall, the god of silence versus the god of lies. They have loathed each other since the dawn of time, the one who sees everything against the one who hides everything. They strike each other down in a final mutual embrace of death. Then the fire comes. Surtur, the fire giant, flings his blade across the 9 realms. The world tree, Yggdrasil, shudders as its branches catch flame. The stars fall from the sky like dying embers. The ocean rises to wash the blood from the earth. And then there is silence. The golden halls are gone. The chains are gone. The poison is gone. The universe returns to the state of Ginnungagap, the great void. As we look back at the 25-minute journey of this man's soul, we are left with a question that echoes longer than the horn of Heimdall. Who was the true villain of this story? Was it Loki, the man who let the world burn? Or was it Odin, the king who stole a father's children to satisfy a prophecy? Was it the gods who demanded Loki's brilliance but offered him nothing but contempt in return? Loki's tale is a timeless tale because it is a mirror. It warns us that when we cast someone out, when we label them as other and treat their gifts with suspicion, we are sowing the seeds of our own destruction. We are teaching them that if they cannot be loved as a brother, they will be feared as a monster. The myth says that from the ashes of Ragnarok, a new world will rise, a greener world, a world without the old grudges and the old chains. But the shadow of the trickster remains in our blood. It reminds us to look at the outsiders in our own lives with a little more mercy and a little less fear. Thank you for journeying through the fire with us today. This has been the epic of Loki, the father of monsters. If this story moved you, if it made you see the villain in a different light, then our work here is done. Don't let the fire die out. Like this video, subscribe to Timeless Tales, and tell us in the comments, do you believe Loki was born evil, or was he a product of Asgard's pride? Your voice is the bridge to our next legend. Until the next sun rises, watch the shadows.